Hi lads, welcome back to another memorable Monday. Today I have a very exciting game for you, played between Baadur Jobava and Ruslan Ponomariov. Jobava is a Georgian Grandmaster and Ponomariov is a Ukrainian Grandmaster. Jobava is one of the few players today that is a trendsetter in chess. People say that he is extremely sharp and tactical, kind of like Mikhail Tal. He likes to sacrifice. He likes to play very aggressive. But the Jobava London is a system that he invented, and he set the trend for this opening. And it's the opening that you all know that I play. So I really wanted to review a Jobava game. This game was played in 2016 in Baku, Azerbaijan. That's the capital of Azerbaijan. And it was the Chess Olympiad, round 8. Let's jump into this game. Jobava played the move d4. His opponent responded with knight to f6, and Jobava played his knight to c3. A very uncommon move, especially at top level play. What can black do in response to knight to c3, and what is white threatening with knight to c3? Well, white is threatening to put his pawn onto e4. This knight controls the e4 square, and so he wants to play e4 and d4 and have a very strong center. Both of these pawns could be controlling the entire center of the board. Black must respond with pawn to d5 to stop this central control by white. If they play anything else, it actually gives quite a good advantage for white. A lot of the time, people like to play the Pirk, where they put the pawn here and the bishop here, and they pull their pawn up to d6. And if white's allowed to play this line, you'll see the engine says the advantage is already plus 0.7475. White already has quite a nice position here. He's got central control, and he's going to be able to get his bishop out, his queen up, and go for an attack on the king side, or even his bishop to f4, his queen up, and go for a really nice attack. There's only one real way for black to stop this. c5 is one of those ways, which is the Benoni. White can push on to d5, e4, and have a very strong spatial advantage. And so the only other move that black can really play to stop this is the move d5, which is what Ponomariov responded with. The reason d5 is a good move is because it controls the e4 square. White can no longer play the pawn to e4. So Jobava plays the third move, bishop to f4. And these three moves, these three opening moves, signify the Jobava London. Now, one of the very simple attacking ideas in the Jobava London is to bring the knight to b5. It seems kind of like an elementary sort of idea, just going after this pawn with both pieces. Black should be aware of this and not allow white to get such an advantageous position. They should not be bringing their knight out to c6, which looks like a very sensible move, because knight to b5, and already white is attacking the pawn on c7. Instead, Ponomariov responded with the move c5. And c5 already puts a pressure on the center, and there are generally two responses to this move. The first response is the move pawn to e4, which is a move that Hans Niemann recommends in his Chessable course. Generally, if you go pawn to e4, we will continue with c takes d4, queen takes d4, knight c6, and the queen is under attack. Now, you could play the bishop here to b5 to pin the knight. I think it's the top engine move. But often people have seen this move, queen to a4, which is a very interesting move. If pawn captures, knight to b5, and here we're threatening to come into c7. The only way to stop white from coming to this square is playing the pawn to e5, which white can just capture for free. And now that the pawn has moved, black, if they were to play the bishop to d6, would be a huge blunder. If they play the knight captures e5, would be a blunder. They have to find the move bishop to c5, which is quite tricky to find, especially if you lads are playing a blitz game online. I think this is a variation that you should go for. Let me just show you what happens if knight takes. If knight takes, we have check, but not just a check with a knight, it's a check also with a queen, so it's a double check. The queen cannot capture because the queen is hitting the king, and the king can only move to e7, and here white just picks up the rook. So white in this position is already up 2 points of material. If we go back to here and look at the bishop block blocking this threat, well, this is clearly bad because you can just capture that bishop. Black cannot recapture because there's a knight here. So this would just be giving a free piece. If we pull back to this position where black has just played c5, Jobava actually opts with the second choice, not bringing his pawn to e4, but instead bringing his pawn to e3. And here black responds by capturing the pawn, and white recaptures. Now we can see in this position that there is still a threat of the knight coming here to b5 and going after this square on c7. So black responds with the move a6, just stopping any piece coming to b5. So white needs to find some other way to attack. Now, one thing in this game that I think I sort of notice when analyzing it is that white is really playing against black's light squared bishop. The bishop is sitting here on c8, and currently it can come to the square f5. It could also come to g4, but it would probably just get kicked around, and eventually it would come onto this diagonal. And so white decides to, instead of bringing his knight to f3, he opts to try to keep black's light squared bishop a very bad piece. He plays the move bishop to d3. And now black's light squared bishop doesn't really have a good square to go to. It can't come out to f5 because the bishop will eat it. And it can't come out to g4 because it'll get kicked. They'll run away, it'll get kicked again, and it'll come back to here, and then it'll get eaten, and the pawns will become doubled on the g file for black. Not ideal. So instead, black just decides to develop his pieces and keep his light squared bishop a bad piece. He pulls his knight up to c6. Knight to c6 attacks the pawn on d4, and so Jobava responds by defending that pawn, going knight g to e2. Black plays e6, solidifying his pawn chain, opening up room for his dark squared bishop, and maybe he wants to castle, but at the same time closes his light squared bishop in. And so this bishop is never going to be a good piece. It's never really going to be able to get onto this side of the board and do damage. White has an option here to castle, or maybe play the queen up and castle the king this way. And so in this position, he plays the flexible move, queen d2, and is just patiently waiting to see what way he wants to castle. Here, black could move their bishop and see what way white castles, but he actually, in this game, decided to go with the move pawn to b5, already starting the queenside attack. Probably this move was made straight away because he saw the queen move and he knew that white wanted to castle this way. Often when there's opposite side castling, so the black king's castled this way and the white king's castled this way, they're on opposite sides of the board, there are a lot of pawn storms that happen on both sides. If you can get your pawn storm attack happening quicker, you're going to be the one who wins the game. So b5 is a very sensible move, but it happens before white has chosen where to castle. And now Jobava is able to choose where to castle, and so he opts for kingside castling in this game. Black then plays the move bishop to e7, probably a move that he could have played on the previous turn, and white just defends naturally with the pawn to a3, stopping any ideas of black's knight coming to b4 and kicking this beautiful d3 bishop, or just trading it off. White does not want that. A few more developing moves are played. Black puts the bishop onto d7. White plays h3, stopping any knight jumps on this side of the board. Black castles. White brings a rook to the center. Black plays the knight over to a5, looking to see if he can get his knight onto a very nice square on c4. And here, white brings his last piece into the game, centralizing both rooks, getting both pieces ready to attack. Now the fun is about to start happening. Queen comes to b6, looking at this pawn that is not protected by another pawn. White responds with the move g3. And now you may be asking yourself, can black not just take this pawn? Well, if black were to do something so stupid, white would just capture the pawn on h7 with check. He needs to be taken or the king has to move. And whatever happens after that, the queen on d2 will eat the queen on d4. So that pawn is a poison pawn. You really can't eat it. Black knows this. He's a grandmaster. And so he plays the move rook f to c8, getting his rook on the most active file that it can be on. And here is the first very exciting move of the game. I think this move is really helpful for me to just look at and see would I find this kind of move in a game. And I can see it now because I know what it is and it's quite obvious to me now. But in a game, especially a rapid game, I'm not really looking for this kind of move. I probably would maybe play my rook up to e5 and try to swing it over here. Or maybe get my queen onto e2 and bring it up this way. Or even lift my rook to e3 so that it could eventually come to g3 and attack. That's probably what I would do. But Jobava finds the perfect move. The best move in the position. Knight to f5. And you could say, well, maybe black can just capture this piece. Well, if he does, white's rook takes the bishop on e7. Now, there's a couple options here that black could go for. One option is he could take the knight. The second option is maybe he wants to just move the bishop because it's under attack and it's not defended. The third option is maybe he defends the bishop with the knight. Let's look at defends the bishop. If black decides to defend the bishop, well, white can just take the bishop, black takes, and then white can play the bishop to g5. The whole idea of bishop to g5 is this knight on f6 isn't able to move. Let's say it does move to a square that it's safe on. Well, white just eats the knight on the other side. So this piece cannot move. And what that means is whatever black decides to do, maybe he brings the queen over, maybe he brings the queen back here, maybe he plays a5, b4, whatever he decides to do, the bishop's going to be eating this knight, the pawn's going to be recapturing, white's just going to be able to bring his pieces in and attack this king that has no pawn in front of him. So this is probably why Ponomariov decides to not defend his bishop. So let's go back and see what's the second option. Well, maybe he wants to move his bishop to f8. Well, Jobava has the brilliant move, knight to h6. And this move is pretty disgusting. You really have to capture here. Bishop captures. And now there's a big time attack coming in. The queen's going to come in here. The rook's going to move over. Let's just say we'll go with the top engine moves after this. Top engine move is queen to d8, defending this bishop. G5 check, king h8, bishop takes on f8, queen takes on f8, and queen captures with check. Only move is queen block. If the king moves over, rook to e3 to g3 is completely crashing. So here, black really needs to block on g7. And you can already see the position. It's completely winning for white. He's up 2.48 here, according to the engine. But his pieces are just way more active. There's a very simple plan of bringing the rook over and attacking. Things just look very, very nice. So we can understand why Ponomariov decides to go with the move pawn takes on f5 in this position. He doesn't want to defend because it doubles his pawns. He doesn't want to move his bishop because white gets a crushing attack. So he just decides to take. And so white recaptures that bishop. The pawns are doubled here on the f-file. The rook is very active, but it's a wee bit off sides. And so in this position, black decides he wants to try to trap that rook, get rid of it before it can escape back to e3 and come over this way. So black plays the move bishop to e6, blocking that rook in. Here, white plays the beautiful move bishop to h6. And I think these kinds of moves are very difficult to find in a chess game, but they're so beautiful. If you're ever able to find these kinds of ideas that work, I think you do need a lot of time to sit there and really calculate for a long time. But this move's really something beautiful. Black could play the top engine move in this position, and that would be knight to h5, defending the pawn. But I'll just go through the computer moves here, the best moves that they could play. Queen to g5, attacking this piece, and also stopping this pawn from capturing the bishop, because now it is a pinned pawn. Here, Black could move their knight over to attack this rook. And in this position, rook captures on e6 is the best move, because now the black queen cannot attack the rook. Pawn captures, bishop to e2, just trying to remove the defender of the g7 square. If white is able to remove this piece, he's checkmating. So black would respond here with queen to c7, defending this. And here, bishop captures on h5 makes the most sense. And king h8 to get out of the pin so that he's able to capture this bishop. The bishop currently can't move because there's a queen blocking its retreat. And so he can move out of the pin and then take the bishop on the next move. So in this position, white's best move would be to pull back to e3, attack this pawn. Black would capture the bishop, white would capture the pawn. And here, white is looking at the pawn on d5, the pawn on f5, and the pawn on h6. White is doing fantastic. Let's move back here to the moment that Jobava played bishop to h6. Black saw all those moves, and instead of moving his knight to h5, he decided to just take the bishop on h6. White recaptures the pawn, and here Black is having a long think. He doesn't know what to do. He eventually decides to try and get a bit of counterplay by taking the knight on c3. Now, the engine does say that the best move is bishop d7. Not the most obvious move to find. White cannot take because black recaptures and defends the queen on b6 with the knight on d7. So this would not be good. White would probably have to play the rook to e1 and try come up to e3 and over to attack this king. But in this position, black took the knight on c3. Here, Jobava played g5 check, forking the king and the knight. So when the king moved, he took the knight on f6, defending his rook on e7. Here, black's rook is in danger, and so he just decides to capture the bishop on d3. And white responded with the move c takes d3. And it was in this position that Ruslan Ponomariov resigned the game. Why did he resign, you ask? Well, let's go through some of the next lines that black could possibly do. One move would be to bring the rook over to e8. Here, white can just capture the pawn with check. Black's only move is to recapture. If he moves the king, this is checkmate. So he has to capture here, and then white just wins the queen. So the rook to e8 is not a very good option. The second move that he could do in this position would maybe be queen to d8. And here, white really can't capture with check because the bishop just takes back and the queen is not hanging anymore. So here, the best move for white would probably be rook to e1. And now his rooks are going to be doubled if the bishop moves. He also has ideas of coming to e3, g3, and looking down this file. If black were to take the rook, this is checkmate, which is a disgusting checkmate. And if black were to play knight to c6, attacking the rook, well then the rooks are now connected. The rook can take on e6, and he defends his own queen, and the pawn can't capture the rook because the pawn is pinned. So it just looks really nasty. Queen takes f6, rook takes f6. Here the knight's in danger, so probably knight captures on d4. Maybe here rook d6, attacking this weakness. Then tempoing the knight off the defense of this pawn and picking this one up. So Jobava is really just dominating in this position. I think it's safe to say that Ponomariov resigned in a lost position. In a chess tournament, all the boards are set up in a big hall, and you have board number 1 is where the top 2 players play, and then there's board number 2 where the next 2 best are playing, and maybe on board 2 there could be better players than on board 1, but for that tournament, board 1 is whoever's doing the best in the tournament is staying on board 1. So for this game, Jobava and Ponomariov were both playing on board 1, and Jobava was awarded for this game the best first board performance of the whole tournament. I hope you guys really enjoyed seeing this game. I thought it was fantastic to look at how Jobava was able to sacrifice knights, sacrifice bishops, and really go for a crushing attack with the Jobava London. Jobava played with a 98% accuracy for this game, and Ponomariov played with an 85.7. Only one inaccuracy the entire game for Jobava, and that was centralizing his rook onto d1. Not a very inaccurate move, a very, very principled move. But I think this was a beautiful game, and I really enjoyed getting to have a look at it. I hope you all enjoyed. If you can, please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and I'll see you all very, very soon.